I guess every West Ham fan must be wondering why on earth we have yet to sign any players in this transfer window. And with just a month to go before the window shuts, fans are beginning to actually ask now whether we're going to sign anyone at all. It is frustrating. Even when I keep saying be patient and have faith, every day that passes without a new face arriving, I find myself asking, I'm sure we all find ourselves asking the same question. Why? Usually, in the past, we'd have the ready made answer. David Sullivan was too slow to act. David Sullivan didn't want to spend the money. But Sullivan has now made it abundantly clear, twice within the space of a week, that he's no longer involved in the day to day operational running of this football club. His response was simple: ask them. And by them, he was referring to Daniel Kretinsky and Vanessa Gold, and I would imagine Karen Brady's replacement, Karim Virani, who now has a huge role to play at this football club. Virani's been brought in to see many aspects of the football club, as well as, from what I understand, the transfer business as well. I'm not saying he's going out to do the transfers, but he'll be negotiating or part of the process. Now, it didn't take long for the club to appoint Niels Koppen to oversee recruitment. And then at the beginning of this week, Ben Chorley was brought in to strengthen that recruitment team with his experience of identifying players capable of succeeding in the championship. On paper, that all sounds very encouraging, but many supporters will be sitting there thinking, it's all very well, but shouldn't all this have happened a long time before? Possibly. Our first championship game away to Burnley is now just over 2 weeks away. We've got one pre-season friendly left against Magdeburg in Germany. And then, of course, in between is the Carabao Cup tie against Portsmouth. And as things stand, our squad is virtually identical to last season's. I guess the only major difference is we've lost Matthias Fernandes and Crescencio Somerville. Now, before we all start panicking, I actually wanted to see whether West Ham were really that far behind everyone else in the championship in terms of transfers. And I've looked at what business has been done so far this summer. Surprisingly, the division has been fairly quiet. Burnley have made the biggest splash, spending around £20 million on a player. A handful of other clubs have spent between £6 to £12 million on various individual players. But beyond that, most clubs have relied on free transfers, loan signings, and relatively inexpensive signings. So although it feels like everyone else is racing ahead of us, whilst West Ham is standing still, the reality isn't quite like that. There's still, however, a lot of work to be done at West Ham. There's plenty of business to be done across the championship. And West Ham, do need to get a move on and start looking at signing players. But in the meantime, players are still going to leave as well as players arriving. And I think Tuesday's official team photograph gave us another clue. Well, that's what I've been told. Apparently, a team photograph was taken on Tuesday, and there were several players, senior players, missing from that photo shoot. Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Jean-Claire Todibo, Nicholas Fulkrug, and Thomas Soucek were not present. Now, Soucek's absence is easily explained because he's recovering from injury, but the others, not really surprised, I guess. Todibo has been heavily linked with a move away because of his falling out with Nuno, and several Italian clubs are looking at potentially purchasing him. Wan-Bissaka's omission will inevitably fuel even more speculation after initial interest in the player from the likes of Everton and Arsenal, apparently. Meanwhile, two players who did appear in the photo, or were in the photo shoot, should I say, were Alphonse Areola and Edson Alvarez. Now, look, both those players could still leave before the window closes if the right offer comes in. But one thing appears to have changed is West Ham don't seem interested in loaning players out anymore, or they're going to try and resist in loaning players out as much as they can. Financially, it simply doesn't make much sense to us. If a player is going to leave, the club wants to have a permanent move. If those transfers don't happen, then the likes of Alvarez and Areola are going to be available for Nuno to use. We continue to hear about Ajax and Real Sociedad battling over Alvarez, but until someone actually submits an acceptable offer, he remains a West Ham player. Which brings me to the point I really want to discuss, and that's about the finances, because I genuinely think we may be overlooking something. Now, look, I'm not going to go into some accounting lecture, and I'm not going to bore you to tears, but I think looking at our current finances might give us a hint as to why we've not made any transfers so far. Not using it as an excuse, but I'll explain in a moment. Now, if you're new to the channel, or if you've watched the West Ham Voice before, but yet to become a subscriber, a QR code has just appeared in that top corner. You can click on that, takes you to the subscription page, free of charge to become a subscriber. If you enjoy the content, why not subscribe? So, we've been told recently that West Ham's financial position is healthier than it was. Great, that's encouraging, but we've never actually been told what that really means. Healthier than what? And healthier by how much? And does healthier actually mean there's money available to spend? Or does it simply mean the club is no longer in the position it found itself 12 months ago? So I want to put a theory to you. And before I go any further, I'm not saying this is definitely the answer of why we've yet to sign anyone. None of us are sitting inside the boardroom. None of us know West Ham's latest financial forecasts. None of us know exactly where the club currently sits under the new financial regulations. But when you start putting things together that's publicly available, I think there's a logical explanation for why this transfer window has been so quiet so far. Over the last 18 months, West Ham have brought in a huge amount of money through player sales. This summer alone, the sale of Fernandes and Somerville has generated £150 million. The club's expected to receive a parachute payment of 40 million for relegation. Several high earners have left over the past 12 months. So the obvious question is, if we've, made all these sales, got all this money coming in, why hasn't any of that translated into new signings? Well, what if we've been asking the wrong question? What if the issue isn't whether West Ham have money to spend, but whether we're actually able to spend it right now? Because they're very two different things. And that's where I think football's new financial rules could become quite significant. I don't think I've uncovered anything great or big secret here, but because when you combine West Ham's published accounts so far, the transfer business over the last 3 windows, the wages still on the books, the players who have returned from loan, and the introduction of the new squad cost ratio, a picture begins to emerge. It may not be the correct picture, but it's certainly one worth considering. Now, let's begin with what we know. The last published accounts covered the 24-25 financial year. They showed losses of more than £100 million. Yep, those figures are historic. A lot has changed since then, but they do tell us something quite important. West Ham were not entering this period from a position of financial strength. There were also widespread reports that the club still had substantial transfer liabilities outstanding, estimated in the region of about £200 million. Now, that doesn't mean we owe £200 million right now. Transfer fees are usually spread over several years. But what it does mean is that the club still has significant financial commitments leaving the business every season. And then along came relegation, and that managed to change everything again. Being relegated means losing a huge amount of revenue from Premier League. Broadcasting revenues will fall dramatically. We're even now hearing reports of redundancies behind the scenes as the club looks to reduce its operating costs. Yep, there's the parachute payment of 40 million coming in, but that isn't extra money. It's there to cushion the financial blow of relegation. It doesn't replace revenue that's been lost, which brings us back to the question, if income has reduced, what about our costs? Because over the last 3 transfer windows, West Ham have been incredibly active. We've invested quite heavily in rebuilding this squad. Incredibly, we've spent over £170 million on the transfer fees, whilst bringing in several experienced players on wage bills. You think about the players that we've signed over the last, 18 months or so, it's been quite significant. At the same time, we've also generated huge income through player sales, bringing in remarkably, about £270 million from outgoing transfers across the same period. That allows, and whilst allowing a number of senior players to leave when their contracts expired. If you think about it, the players that left, when their contract expiry included players like Danny Ings, Kurt Zuma, and the like. Now, on the surface, that sounds like excellent business, which is again why so many supporters are asking, if we've generated all this money, why are we not spending the money? I don't think the answer is as simple as that. I don't think it's as simple as saying that we don't want to spend the money. I think the answer might lie elsewhere. And to explain that, we need to understand one very important difference between the old financial rules and the new ones. For years, everyone's known about PSR. Whenever a club gets into financial trouble, that's the first thing we talk about. PSR mainly looked at one thing: how much money a club had lost over a rolling 3-year period. If those losses were too great, clubs will risk being sanctioned. But the landscape's now changed. Clubs are now operating under something called SCR, Squad Cost Ratio. I'm not going to give you a lecture about how it all works, but you've got to understand the basic principles. That's all that matters. You think of it like your own household budget. Imagine your income falling by, say, a half. The first thing you're probably going to do is look at your biggest bills. You're not going to immediately go out and buy something shiny and new. You're going to want to reduce your costs first. And that's the same as a club. Our income has gone down, which means we've got to reduce our costs, got to look at getting rid of more players. And, that's essentially what SCR does, is what it's trying to achieve. Rather than simply looking at how much money a club loses over 3 years, like PSR, it looks at the ongoing annual costs of running a football club and compares it with the income that's coming in. So if your income drops, but your footballing costs don't, the ratio starts moving in the wrong direction. And that's why relegation is significant. West Ham's income has fallen dramatically, as I've said. But if the income has fallen, have the costs fallen? No, because when you start looking at the costs, you start realizing they're still significantly high. Using the best estimates available and allowing for the reported 50% wage reduction for most of the players because of relegation, West Ham's highest earners are still likely to cost the club somewhere in the region between 35 to 40 million pounds this season. And that's only talking about the most senior top earning players. It doesn't include the rest of the first team squad. It doesn't include academy players. It doesn't include coaching staff. It doesn't include agent fees or the annual accounting costs attached to transfer fees. Suddenly, you begin to realize that West Ham's football operation is still costing a significant amount of money every year. But there's another factor that's almost gone unnoticed. Last season, West Ham managed to remove a significant amount of money from the wage bill by loaning out several players: James Ward-Prowse, Edson Alvarez, Nicholas Fulkrug, Maxwell Cornet. Between them, those 4 players were estimated to be earning something in the region of 18 to 20 million pounds a year before relegation. The loan clubs certainly took on some or all of that cost, which is why we managed to reduce our wage bill last year. That gave West Ham valuable breathing space. But fast forward to the present day, all 4 players are back. And even allowing for the 50% reduction because of relegation on their wages, that could still amount to something like £10 million on this season's wages for those 4 players alone. It's a huge amount of money returning to the books overnight. And unless those players leave permanently, those costs remain. Let's go back to the 2 sales that we made this summer, Fernandes and Somerville, reportedly bringing in £150 million. Most supporters will naturally look at that figure and go, brilliant, we've got £150 million to spend. But we know that football doesn't work that way. We've received a substantial transfer fee, but we've removed 2 players from the club who were quite valuable to us. It also removes, the remaining annual accounting costs of their fees for money that we owed on them. Now, all of that does create financial room. But if West Ham immediately sign 3 or 4 expensive replacements on long contracts, that starts filling up that space again. And every signing brings a wage. Every signing brings an annual transfer cost. Every signing increases the overall cost of the squad. So perhaps we're looking at those sales in the wrong way. Maybe Fernandes and Somerville weren't sold simply to create a transfer budget. Maybe they were sold to create financial headroom, because those two are completely different things. One gives you cash, the other gives you room to operate within financial regulations. And if my theory has any truth in it, that would explain why West Ham seem far more interested in moving more players on than buying them at this moment in time. Think about some of the names that continue to dominate the rumours: Edson Alvarez, Nicholas Fulkrug, John Claire Todibo, Alphonse Areola, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Maxwell Cornet. They aren't just footballing decisions. They could as easily be financial decisions to move all those players on. Moving one high earner off the wage bill doesn't just reduce costs, it potentially creates enough room to bring in 1, 2, 3, perhaps 4 players on lower wages in the Championship. Suddenly, the strategy starts making a lot more sense. It also makes Ben Chorley's appointment easier to understand. His job simply isn't to identify talented footballers. His job is to find players who improve the squad whilst fitting in with whatever financial model West Ham are currently working within. That could mean younger players, players with resale value, players whose wages are much more manageable, players who don't create another financial headache in a year or two down the line. And perhaps that's exactly where West Ham United are at right now, and why we've not acted in bringing any players in. We need to create more financial headspace before we start signing players. Now, I want to stress something because it's important. It's my theory. None of us know what West Ham's current squad cost ratio is. None of us know exactly what financial targets the owners have set. None of us know how much room the club believes it has before making further signings. But when you combine everything that's publicly known, the reported losses, the outstanding transfer commitments, the reduction in wage revenue after relegation, the several high earners who are back from loan, the introduction of SCR, I think it becomes much easier to understand why this transfer window has become so cautious. Maybe the biggest problem isn't finding the players to bring in. Maybe it's creating enough financial room to be able to sign them. If that's the case, the next big move in this transfer window may not be the arrival of a new signing. It may be yet the departure of even more players from the club. And only then might we finally see this transfer window finally burst into life. Of course, it's my interpretation with the information that's out there. I could be completely wrong. There may be other reasons why West Ham have been so quiet this summer, but I want to put that theory to you, because the more I look into it, the more it started to make sense in my mind. I'd be genuinely interested to find out what you think. Do you think, or do you believe SCR could be one of the main reasons behind West Ham's lack of activity this summer? Or do you think there's a completely different explanation? Let me know your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you think. If you've enjoyed this seminar, please do hit the like button, become a subscriber, and also hit the hype button as well. Thank you for watching and listening. It's been a bit of a tough one to listen to, I'm sure, but I hope you found it worthwhile.